Hello there. Good morning. If you're here for survival mode, how support and documentation teams can help combat churn with Megan Gilhooly and Sara Feldman, you're in the right place.
And if you are, I just joined the show. Apparently I was on mute there for just a second. My name is Scott Abel, and I'll be your host today. Thank you for my assistant jumping in there. Wanted to tell you about a few upcoming shows we have coming. Tomorrow we'll be featuring a talk show called Coffee and Content, where we'll be talking about preventing cybersecurity risks while you're working at home. Our guest will be MK Palmore, who's the Director of Security at Palo Alto Networks. Not going to want to miss that show. We've also got a great show coming up with my co-host Megan Gilhooly. We'll be talking with content strategy maven Christina Halverson about the role of product content, how it plays a role in the customer experience. Definitely want to join us for that show. And about our show today, a few things that you need to know. First, we can't see or hear you, so the camera and microphone you don't have to worry about. We won't be able to eavesdrop or see what's going on in your house. You can't have a two-way conversation with us, but here's a few things that you can do. You can raise your hand and ask a question by using the Ask a Questions tab located in your webinar viewing panel. It allows you to text us a question, and we cannot text you back, as I said earlier, but I'll queue up as many questions as possible and ask them of the presenters at the end of today's show. You can also get help by looking in the attachments and links sections. There's some troubleshooting information and some connections to the BrightTalk customer support team in case you need those. And you can give feedback on the way out. We'd love for you to rate the quality of the presenter's content today on a 1 through 5-star rating, with 1 being a low star and 5 being high. And the last thing, there's content available in the attachments and links section of our webinar program, webinar viewing panel. You can check it out there by scrolling through, get a copy of today's slides, including some white papers from our sponsor and links to the presenters' LinkedIn pages where you can learn more about them and contact them if you would like. There's also some information available from our sponsors, ZoomIn Software. And speaking of ZoomIn, they are our sponsors today. And we want you to know that ZoomIn helps your customers find the answers that they need while empowering agents to deliver better support content. ZoomIn's platform ingests all your technical content and delivers a unified and personalized source of product answers wherever your customers are looking for them. That includes in your documentation site, in your service portal, on your online community, or even inside your product. You definitely want to go check out the offerings at zoominsoftware.com. Thanks to ZoomIn for being our sponsor today. And welcome, the Vice President of Customer Experience from ZoomIn happens to be our first presenter today. Megan Gilhooly, are you on the line?
I'm here, Scott.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us today. Can you tell the audience briefly who you are and why you're connected to this topic?
Yes, I am the Vice President of Customer Experience at ZoomIn, and I have a long career managing content teams and working directly with support organizations to ensure that the content that's being created is lining up with support KPIs. And so, yeah, it's a big topic for me.
And it's a big topic for everyone today, including our guest content industry expert, Sara Feldman. Sara, are you on the line?
Hi, yes, I am.
Excellent. Sara, where are you broadcasting from today?
I'm in San Diego.
Great. And can you tell our audience just briefly who you are and a little bit about your experience and why it relates to the topic today?
Yes, absolutely. So my career has been spent in technical communication, technical content strategy, more recently content experience, and really focusing on that customer experience and how our content can enable them to be successful.
Excellent. And that's certainly on the minds of all of our viewers today. And as I start the show here and let you guys take over and do a presentation, I wanted to tell our audience members who have just joined us that they can ask a question at any time using an app, the question feature on the webinar viewing panel. You just click the button, ask a question, and type it in. We can't type an answer back to you, but I'll queue them up and ask as many as possible of our presenters at the end of today's show. All right, so ladies, I'm going to pass the virtual baton to you, put myself on mute. I'll monitor the questions panel from the back room, and I'll join you at the end of the show to take questions from the audience.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Really, really good to be here. Thank you to everybody for joining. A number of you probably were on last month, but I just wanted to remind everyone that last month we talked to Ann Waite and Elena Nedelku from Ping Identity about how content can help drive support KPIs. And this is a bit of a follow-on from that conversation. Today we're taking this one step further, and we're going to be talking about the content's role in combating churn specifically. And so I'm so excited to have Sara on to talk about this, because this is right in her wheelhouse. So Sara, thanks so much for joining me.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
Good. So I guess before we get started, how are you doing, and what do you plan to do when everything opens up again? What's your first plans?
Great question. I think it will be to spend some time with friends in person. That so far we've just been connecting virtually. It'd be nice to go grab a meal or a walk with a friend.
Right. I think grabbing a meal, sitting somewhere else other than my house, which is completely under construction, will be the first thing I do. So we're looking forward to that. All right, let's talk about what we're going through today.
When your expectations are higher and you now expect devices and information to sort of cater to you and how you're seeking information. And so that's really changed what our content has to do as well. So again, if we rewind, back in the day, documentation really just needed to be user manuals. Organizations had to tell customers how things were intended to work, what the commands were, what the options were. Maybe it evolved to troubleshooting, and that was kind of it for a while. And now that customers have this control and higher expectations, they don't want to just know about features and functionality. They want to be enabled and empowered by the knowledge we have within an organization to help them realize value as they use our products and services.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to mention we're getting some feedback that maybe the video is down for a few folks, so we're working on trying to figure out how to fix that. Hopefully it's not widespread, but wanted to just point that out. But really good points, Sara. So I'm thinking of an example. One of the things that comes to mind is, we used to, as technical writers anyway, we used to care almost solely about grammar and spelling and style and how we wrote things, right? And now that's a little bit secondary to making sure we get the message out and that we have high SEO. But when you think about search engine optimization, we also used to really care about what landed on the first page of Google. And now that we have voice search, really only number one matters.
Thinking of an example.
Sounded like there was a little bit of an echo. Maybe if you keep going, it'll be okay.
Okay. Anyway, so yeah, I was kind of done there. So with voice search, really only number one matters. And so these are things that really, where the evolution of content has changed how we have to think about how we produce the content, how we think about the content, how we rate the content, and all that. So really interesting stuff.
That's a great point. It's a perfect example, and there's so many, but that was kind of the easiest to highlight, I would say, in terms of an example of how this technology and device evolution has so changed how we need to think about content. I'm hearing some weird audio feedback. Are you guys as well? I think we'll keep moving forward. Hopefully folks are hearing us okay. So now let's talk about KPIs. Super important because we need to be able to measure what we're doing to know how it's successful and how to improve. So when we look at KPIs here, and this is a good conversation when we need to look at how support and doc teams or content teams need to collaborate more. If we look at these support metrics on the left, they probably are familiar to most folks who are aware of sort of typical support center measurements. And it's all about that interaction. How are we measuring that interaction? What's happening during that interaction? Are we meeting our SLAs? It's very internally, operationally focused. Similarly with content teams have all kinds of different metrics that they look at. A lot of them are how are they publishing according to schedule, to their own SLAs perhaps, how much is their content being viewed. Perhaps they're looking at content feedback. I noted here that we talk about content feedback a lot, but if we're talking about on-page feedback, the standard is 1% or less folks who actually interact with feedback, so we have to keep that in mind when we're evaluating how useful it is. And so what we really need to work towards is looking at how do all of these metrics work together when it comes to the customer outcome perspective, that outside-in perspective. What are our customers trying to achieve? Our customers certainly don't care about any of those metrics on the left or the right. Maybe SLAs, okay, we can give them that. They want a quick response. But other than that, that's really operationally focused, and same with our content metrics. And really we need to be looking at how do these metrics play a role in combination with customer outcomes. What's the correlation between these internal activities and external outcomes? So a couple of examples that I heard is that organizations who link content to cases, so when they're responding to a customer via a case, they're linking relevant knowledge to that case, measuring is customer satisfaction higher when content is associated versus when it's not. Or looking at trends, customer loyalty trends. Are customers who are interacting with your knowledge base or your technical content, are they more likely to renew because they're getting the information they need to be successful with products? So it's a matter of thinking about how your individual team metrics plug into the bigger picture of what your customers need. And then the important thing to do, later on we'll talk about this a bit more though, is start to think about how can you then take insights from this perspective and actually improve your products and services in the first place so that you're eliminating sort of root cause issues and friction.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you've tied all these things together. The Pingdales, I remember, used NPS, and you have that as a customer outcome. They also look at mean time to resolve, which is similar to some of what you have, and they had case or ticket deflection. So definitely those are important support metrics. And I think it's important to note that you didn't put all of the hundreds of metrics that we could pull for support or content. Obviously, there are tons and tons of metrics we could pull, but I love the idea that you're connecting the content metrics to the support metrics, which then drive specific customer outcomes. So that's awesome. So when we think about this, how do we ensure that as we work together to create these outcomes, that we're making the best decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question. And because there are so many variables and variations across organizations, I mean, we could give some examples here, but certain metrics could correlate in one business to be a good thing versus a bad thing in another business, right? Every organization is quite unique. And so I think it's helpful to have some guiding principles that you can apply to whoever you are, whatever your industry is. So today in particular, we're going to talk about three. Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt real quick. I just got a note that if people are having a hard time seeing the video, if you refresh your screen, you should be able to get the video to come back. So just wanted to throw that in there. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No problem. Good luck to everyone else. I hope you guys can see and hear us. So as I was saying, oh, it's a fun one today. As I was saying, we have three guiding principles that I think can sort of help you think through this journey towards better collaboration. So the first one that's worth talking about is, of course, aligning objectives. So this is kind of an extension of what we already talked about, which is that it's very common in organizations for different teams to have different metrics, and sometimes they kind of get stuck there. And they know that they're all sort of working towards the big thing, but the same big, main outcome, customer success, but they stay maybe too siloed, at least in their metrics. So it's important to think about how across teams, you're going to maintain different triggers and workflows. So support teams, they have their own triggers. A case comes in, a customer issue comes in, there's maybe the system goes down, right? They're very reactive, and that's their trigger, and they have their case resolution process, they have their own workflows. Similarly with content teams, they're often more driven by product development cycles or some other initiatives that are maybe more planned out, and they can be more proactive with how their content is created. So, and think to all of your folks who answered how many teams create content in your organization. You're all going to have your different triggers and workflows, but it's a matter of thinking about how they all fit in together to the same outcome, the same objectives. And also thinking through opportunities for how that knowledge can be shared. I've already seen this a whole lot more where marketing teams, especially on social channels, they're sharing more technical content, customer success-oriented technical content that maybe a non-marketing team is creating, or maybe CSMs are creating content. And how can you work towards more internal awareness about all the content that's being created and how you can share it towards the same outcomes?
Yeah, and you mentioned the votes, and the votes came in at, for 6 or more teams, about 38% of the audience. 4 to 5 teams and 2 to 3 teams both have 19%, and then 23% are the lucky ones that have just one. I don't know if that's lucky or not. That might mean they have more work to do, but I think that's some of us would look at that and go, oh my gosh, that makes it so much easier. So
yeah, I wonder how many of those are solo tech writers. Yeah, sometimes they're solo tech writers.
Right, that could be. Maybe it's not lucky then. Yeah, that's true. That's so true. Yeah, and going back to this idea of search engine optimization, I have actually I went through a time where this became a bit of an issue. So I was working with an SEO gal who was really, really adamant that we had to keep a certain page up because it was ranking really high. And I appreciated her goal of wanting to keep that high ranking stuff because she's being gold on how it generates leads and where it sits in SEO. Unfortunately, that page was from a really old product version. And so it was actually angering customers who were going to Google to try and find like the 9.0 version, and they kept coming up with the 6.0 version. So we had to sit down and actually figure out how to do the redirect so that she would keep her good SEO ranking, that it would generate the leads that were required, but that it also wasn't angering our customers. So that's where I think that's a good example of where you can sort of align objectives, especially between tech comm or support and marketing. So anyway, that's just a quick example.
I love that example. It really highlights how we can kind of get stuck unintentionally in maybe optimizing for the wrong outcomes because we have these separate goals, and it isn't until we really collaborate on sharing objectives and outcomes that we can kind of adjust and come to a great compromise, right? You can maintain the SEO and still drive towards the better outcome for your customers.
Exactly.
So that was the first principle, is maintaining or finding that alignment and always kind of revisiting and strengthening that alignment. So now this is a great segue from what you already talked about, which is that when you're making those decisions, when you're figuring out what to align on, you always want to be prioritizing based on what your users need, not what you need. If at any point you have an internal reason that's causing you to not do what's best for the customer, then you need to have that tough conversation internally, and revisit what really matters. And so it's a matter of thinking about how can we constantly be working towards minimizing customer effort and maximizing the value that they're experiencing. So this is an ongoing thing. It can be very data-driven. It requires a lot of cross-functional collaboration, I think, to get all of the sort of external inputs to really understand where your customers might be struggling and always putting them first. And sometimes it requires revisiting some assumptions you've had about what matters. This is especially true, I think, for content folks. I can say this because I've been a technical writer. I started my career as a technical writer, and there's some things that I used to think mattered the most. Like, we can't publish anything that has a single typo, and it should have gone through X number of reviews to be the most perfect quality content ever. Well, that's not necessarily the priorities that your customers need. Your customers need the most most important relevant knowledge now. So if at any point you're having lengthy workflows that are impeding exactly when and how your customers are able to get access to the knowledge they need, then your priorities aren't tuned exactly how they need. And I like to bring up the inverted pyramid writing style for this. It's from journalism. As you know, the most important information for facts of an article occur first at the very top, and then it expands out. And I think we need to apply this both literally and figuratively to our writing approach, which is that literally when we're creating content, the quickest, most succinct way to answer the problem, the question, point them to the solution should go at the top. And if there's more relevant information, then you can expand. And figuratively too, it's a matter of really isolating what's most important for your customer and prioritizing that first and foremost, and then figuring out how everything else can fit in.
Yeah, such good points you brought up. I love the idea of, I don't remember how you said it, but the way I say it is like disconfirming your own beliefs. And that is so important. And that can be really difficult, especially for those of us that have been writers for many decades. That can be really difficult to kind of look beyond that. But yeah, very good points. And of course, as a former journalist, I love the upside down pyramid. So
yeah, perfect.
Very nice.
Yeah, some assumptions that I've heard out there in the last couple of years is content folks trying to maintain this difference between what is official product documentation versus support or knowledge-based content, and how important it is to maintain both separately because they believe that customers see documentation as more authoritative and they see knowledge-based content as something else, and therefore it needs to be separate. And actually what you end up doing is creating a splintered knowledge experience for your customers. If they need to go to location A for one type of information and location B for another, you're making them think about it. And really all of your content should be presented in a way that's authoritative and easy to access.
Right. I can't imagine anyone wanting their knowledge-based articles to not be authoritative.
Right.
Right.
And
like
maybe that assumption was true at some point. Maybe at some point knowledge bases were so new that people didn't really have, they didn't really believe in their authority. But I think we're past that by now.
Yeah. I think where they differ is they typically do, when I think about, they typically are more like the Uber driver that takes people door to door, whereas, the documentation is there to get the masses as far or as close to their destination as possible. So they're more like the bus system, right? So I think in that way, they are slightly different, but that doesn't necessarily mean that one should be or is less or more authoritative. They both should be giving exactly the same message when the same message applies. So
yeah, and delivering it in a way that's best for your customers. I love that analogy, that transportation analogy. So, and then of course another way to think about this is we talk about ROI all day long in organizations, but customer value realization really is your customer's ROI. They're spending money or time on your product or service. They're expecting value out of it, and we should be maximizing that for them. So then a third principle that I think is helpful to keep in mind is that, as we talked about, we need data, we need our KPIs to drive our decisions, prioritize what we do, when and how, and we need to think about data in terms of two concurrent swim lanes that should always be happening with our content. So first, of course, we want to improve the content experience. That's what we wake up and go to work for every day. So we're looking at, those metrics that we looked at earlier on. Some of those are helpful for that. How are folks using our content? But really, we need to, again, be looking at how they're using our content in the context of what they're trying to achieve to figure out where they're struggling. So a really important thing I like to call out here, and I've been in this position as a knowledge-based manager in the past where the executives want to see these monthly dashboards, and they're vanity dashboards full of vanity metrics because they're dashboards that basically just say, look how popular our content is, right? Look how often people are using our content. And that's great, I guess, but that's not really showing anything of value or progress. And so instead of trying to create dashboards to show how important content is, think about digging into data to figure out where customers are struggling. Where are they experiencing friction between your content experience and your product experience? Where are they struggling? Where's ticket deflection failing, for example? Where are they not finding the answers to their questions? When are they searching and getting 0 results, or clicking through the content and then opening a case anyway? Digging into where there's friction in the metrics is really where you want to focus to improve your content over time. Another couple things that I want to go ahead.
I was just going to say that's really, it's interesting you talk about the vanity metrics, and I just want to make clear that page views is one of those things where some people say they're really important, some people say it's really not important, and really it can be an important signal if it tells you that your site's gone down, or it could be a very important metric if your goal is to get eyeballs, meaning you're selling advertising and all you really care about is how many eyeballs are seeing it. But it doesn't really give you an idea of what type of people are coming to your site. It doesn't give you a lot of the customer outcomes that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great point. Any metric can or cannot be a vanity metric depending on how you're using it. Are you looking at this data in a way where you can have actionable insight? Then it's not just a vanity metric. You're doing something about it. And a couple metrics to call out that are worth exploring if you're relying on them a lot is, one is bounce rate. I know Google Analytics loves to put this front and center on their dashboards, and over time I've encountered people having a negative connotation with a high bounce rate, we always want to decrease our bounce rate. And to your advertiser website example, we don't want a high bounce rate. That's one example where that is bad. But often, especially in the support context, a bounce rate just means that they're hitting one page and leaving the website. For many troubleshooting scenarios, that's a great thing. So understanding when and where those bounces are happening, you can't just look at an overall bounce rate and say it's good or bad. You have to drill in and, again, correlate it with the type of information that the customer is looking for. And other things related to that, like session length, bounce rates can actually impede what your session duration is. So some of these metrics that are almost too easy to look at in isolation, like if it's very easy to sort of just throw up on a board and say, look at this, you probably, there isn't really an easy button when it comes to metrics. So you probably need to dig in a little bit more.
Right.
Now, of course, another important aspect of data-driven optimization is, Megan, you and I have been chatting about this, that the goal ultimately is to work ourselves out of a job in a sense, which is if we could reduce the need or eliminate the need for self-service content altogether, that would be great. Now, fortunately, we're both quite confident that will never happen because there will always be continued as things evolve so quickly, there's always new products and issues and new things that our customers are trying to do. So we're always gonna be there, of course. However, this goes back to that vanity metric idea. If over time you're just showing more and more engagement with your support content, that isn't necessarily a good thing if all of your support content is troubleshooting. How and when can you look at those content engagements, those content interactions, and figure out what you should prioritize with actually improving your product or service in the first place to eliminate that content interaction need from occurring at all, that root cause analysis. And it's a matter of thinking about content interactions have really become a part of the product experience and thinking about those as a whole and how can you get those insights from the content interactions and your support interactions, of course, and figure out how we can actually improve the customer experience by reducing the friction like I was talking about.
Absolutely. And, this can go beyond just the product itself, and it spans into policy. I worked for a large company that I'm not going to name now, and we had some policies that were confusing just in the policy itself. We had policies that people didn't like, and the content that we wrote, the more clear we made the content, the more confusing the policy was for people, unfortunately. And so it wasn't about how clearly we wrote the content. It still drove contacts to the support team because people didn't like the policy or they thought the policy didn't make sense for them. And so we actually pushed back on the policy team and said, go reevaluate the policies. We can't fix it by making it sound better. So go reevaluate the policies.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that you brought up that it's not just products or services, it's policies, it's any sort of interaction that your customer's having with your organization. Is there room for improvement that you're gleaning that sort of room for improvement from your content interactions? And I think, like rethinking vanity dashboards, how great would it be if every month or every quarter to your executives you showed them the number of product or process or organizational improvements you've suggested based off of content insights, right? Like actually suggesting specific things to improve. That's something that's worth bragging about, I would say, more so than page views on their own.
Absolutely. So let's move on, because we're still talking about customer experience, but I really want to get to how can we being the audience here, how can we unify our customer experience, make it all better the way you've described, without risking productivity issues that stem from forcing all content creators into one tool, let's say?
Yeah, great question. And you hear that a lot about trying to get folks aligned on the tools. But like we talked about, you have these different triggers and workflows, and those are important in an organization. Silos get a bad reputation, and they are troublesome when you're not collaborating across them. But you have cross-functional, you have these different functions for a reason. So you can actually sort of embrace that as you move towards a more unified experience. So this is how I would recommend thinking about it, which is first think about all the content that's generated in your organization. And actually, I think it would be interesting for all the folks who voted earlier in terms of how many content teams they have in their organization, if they really dig in and think about it from what are all the sources of content or organizational knowledge that are being generated in your organization and shared externally, either directly or indirectly, I think a lot of folks might bump up their numbers there. Because, again, if you think about it like that, anyone in your organization is likely in a position where they're generating knowledge. There's the obvious ones, of course, like your product teams, your doc teams, training, marketing, folks like that. But, of course, CSMs, what kind of interactions are they having with their customers directly or as part of campaigns where knowledge is getting shared? Support, obviously, they're often creating, like solving new problems and creating new knowledge to deliver to customers. And so it's worth thinking about them as content creators as well. Content is just information that needs to be shared with customers. Sales engineers, services, I've seen these folks creating their own quick little like product demos, sending out to prospects. So it's worth really thinking about who and how is everyone generating knowledge in the organization, and at least starting the conversations with them to think about how you can collaborate or gain insights. I don't think you should go to sales and say, never create your own demo if it's the right thing to send. It's more about starting the conversation with them and being aware. And that is that inside-out perspective, which we talk about outside in a lot, but it is okay to have an inside-out perspective as long as it's in the context of what your customers need. And you need to know what's happening in your organization to create that content. And then moving on to identifying outputs and customer touch points, that's the outside-in perspective. What are all the ways that you're interacting with your customers on your website, through social, direct communication, within your product experience? And then, of course, there's lots of third-party versions of all of what we just talked about, where the third-party forums or information sites that your customers are going to look for knowledge.
Very nice. I love how you break this into inside out versus outside in. I think it's really important because a lot of us tend to think about our productivity inside and how much pain we feel in creating content. And sometimes, even though we know the customer experience is so important, we have a hard time kind of balancing how do we make the best customer experience, but also really think about this. So I think you've laid out a really good paradigm here. Super interesting.
Yeah, great. Thanks. And then once you've done that sort of discovery to sort of know what's happening in your organization, what are your customers expecting, how do you actually enable this unified experience? So you want to make sure that all of the information is connected to all of the touch points appropriately. And also keep in mind that when we say information here, it can mean content and it can also mean data. That's becoming increasingly important. Customer data when it comes to enabling personalization and personalized content experiences. How are you setting up bi-directional data exchange with your customers so that you can continue to optimize a content experience or a knowledge sharing experience for them? And again, what are those common metrics that everyone should be aligned on? And more than likely, you're going to have some significant gaps in what you're tracking right now. And it's important to identify where you need to improve to start to collect the insights that you need. And
Awesome.
then finally, of course, you need tools to make this happen. And I think it's important to list this last because it's easy to get stuck in a tools-first mindset. I've worked for software vendors in this space, and we all want everyone to think about tools first, but it really should be the last step, and you should have a very clear vision of what it is that you're trying to achieve, how you need to achieve it, and then you can figure out what tools are available to enable that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen people come in and say, oh, we need to pull SharePoint in right now. And I say, why? And they tell me all the great things about SharePoint, and really it becomes a solution waiting for a problem, right? Like you're not really addressing any problems. You just like SharePoint, or you just like Confluence, or whatever the tool is. So yeah, that's a really, really good thing to consider. Make sure we're addressing problems first, and then bring in the right tools to address those problems, or to create the unified strategy that we want. Really, really great information, Sara. Thanks so much. I really appreciate this time, and hopefully everyone enjoyed it. If anyone has questions, please put them into the question bar. I did want to mention, while you're busy writing your questions, that we have a couple resources for you here, and then of course there's a whole ton. There's, I think, 31, it says, attachments and links that you can go to in the attachments and links section. One of those, of course, is our latest white paper. We also have links to our next talk show, which Scott brought up at the beginning. We have another webinar coming up in June. We'll have more webinars after that. So hopefully this has been really, really helpful for folks. And we should have one more. Do we have one more poll? Did the poll go through? It went through.
The poll is
going
now.
Scott, go ahead.
I've got some questions from the audience. So one of the first questions that we received is, do you have any advice, this is aimed at Sara, I think, do you have any advice on how we can convince others that our ideas are valuable and to management, I guess, is kind of where they were heading?
Yeah, it's kind of getting obsessive about highlighting the customer experience and what's best for them, and trying to paint a really clear picture of how focusing on your best customer outcomes are what's best for the business. It's how you're going to get customers that either adopt more features or stay on longer or buy more, expand, renew, all of that. And sometimes it takes some really specific examples, walking folks through what your customer journey is and where they might be experiencing friction and challenge, make it very real for them. Like that manager or executive that they're trying to convince is also a consumer elsewhere. So bring up examples of how they would feel similarly frustrated if this was happening to them, and how important it is to collectively evolve towards what's best for the customer.
Excellent, and I think that last polling question is now displaying on the screen, which is, would you like to learn how Zoom In unifies your content without impacting your day-to-day tools? If you do, definitely participate in that polling question so that the appropriate people can reach out to you. Another question from an audience member is, how likely is it that we can get marketing or insert other department here to see where the value of technical content is if they don't already know it's useful? What tactics can we use to show them and prove that it could be?
Megan, I don't know. Do you want to come, Megan?
Yeah. So whether it's marketing or really anyone, going back to what Sara was talking about with outcomes is so important. If you just come to them with your favorite tool or your favorite way of doing things, or you come to them and say, oh, you guys should be in BIDA or whatever, they're going to push back and say, no way, we want to do our thing. So the most important thing I find is that you need to find a way where they can work in the tools they want to work in. They can author in the way that they want to author, but that you can work together to deliver a better customer experience that then helps to support marketing's goals. So if their goals are lead generation, then help them put the most helpful content out there that will support that goal.
Megan, when you played the managerial role or supervisory role, how did you balance the content creator's desire to do it the way they want to do it with the computer's requirement for it to be done a specific way?
That's an interesting question. The computer's requirement. I don't know if that's getting
For example, some people say, I don't want to create structured content because it cramps my style, so I do it this way. And so every time I've been in a management role and I've given people the ability to develop a workaround, they took advantage of that every single time that I left a workaround open.
Right.
In order for me to make them do it, I would have to create rules that were not just verbal or written down on a piece of paper, but enforced by my tools so that they would do what I wanted them to do. And it was often not because I personally wanted it to be different, it's because the way that we were using computer power to move our content around required us to do that. So how do we balance this? We should give them a comfortable way to author with the requirement sometimes that they have to do it differently, even if they might not prefer to do it that way.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I would say the first thing I would look at is if we have a mechanical requirement, I'll call it, something that a computer is expecting us to do, is there a way we can change the computer's expectation? So is there a different methodology for how we're delivering content that can change that expectation so that people don't have to come into one tool? I think it's really easy for managers to come in and say, everyone must be in my tool and everyone must do this format, and that's the only way we can unify the experience. But the reality is that's not true. There's ways you can deliver, and of course this, truth be told, I brought in Zoomin. I'm a former Zoomin customer, and so when this became the big issue, it was bring in something like Zoomin to make sure that you're delivering to all the channels without multiplying all of the places that you're creating and managing content, but allowing marketing to be in their favorite tools and TechCom to be in their favorite tools and the developers to be in their favorite tools. Just bring it all together and make sure that you have all of the content where the customer needs it, but that authors can author where they are. I really think that's the key.
The follow-up question was, are there situations where your desire to allow them to use the same tools sometimes just doesn't, that's not how it's going to shake out? For example, structured content can only be created by structured content-enabled tools. So if you want structured or you need structured content and they're using unstructured tools, their desire to use unstructured tools does not support your desire to adopt the capability that structured content gives you. I think the person's question was, as a manager, how did you try to figure out how to balance those when the needs of the business have to be the driver, but you want to personally, as the manager, be empathetic to your employees?
Yeah. So I think I always hired people on my team that were very good at structured content, but we always had a way for other teams to sort of translate unstructured content into structured. And so we would take the onus on our backs. We would take the burden on our backs as our team, but we would give them a way to create a WYSIWYG-like fashion. So whether it's a KB article or maybe a document, we give them a template that easily translates on the back end into XML. And so that was something that we did. Now today, do we even need to go that far? Probably not, but that's what I did, back when this was a big issue.
That makes sense. There was another question that asked, do either of you have examples of solutions of real-world content on the web where integrated content, in other words, technical documentation is integrated with knowledge base and other types of content? And if so, would you share them with the audience?
That's a great question.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sara.
I was just going to say that I think that it can be hard to find examples of this because, in my opinion, as an industry, we're not as evolved as we should be on this. So it's easy to get confirmation bias out there and say, like, look at all these other people still doing it this old way. Why do we have to go to the next step and make it seamless? A great place to look for examples, I think that consumer-oriented products do a better job of this than B2B. Right now, this is timely. It's tax season. I know I've been using some of those, Tax Act or TurboTax, and those, to me, are a great example of when I'm using the product, all of the help and question icons and the information I need to know, it's not only do I not even know if they have a difference between knowledge-based content and documentation, I've never even had to do that, it's all fully integrated right where I'm using the product. So I think thinking about things like that, and sometimes we think it's okay to make business teams work harder to find information, but I think we can look at these consumer-oriented tools and experiences and figure out how we can replicate that for B2B scenarios.
Sara, thank you.
Yeah, and it's interesting you brought up consumer versus B2B. The tough part about B2B is oftentimes KB articles are locked down. So really, we have, because Zoomin has an app in the Salesforce community, we also have one inside of ServiceNow. We have tons of these examples, but I can't necessarily show them to you because a lot of times you have to be logged in as a customer in order to do that. So whoever wrote this, if you want to reach out to me, I can see if you're a customer, or if you're a customer of any of ours, we can certainly show you these. They're not always open to the public because the nature of KB articles is they're usually... Yep.
You'll have that information at the end of the show and can reach out to them definitely if you'd like to, if they don't get to you first. Also, my personal experience is I just relocated to another house, and I did not bring all of my furniture with me. In the middle of being in a lockdown, I don't have the luxury of being able to go to the furniture store, so I had to buy some things online. And in order to do that, I had to learn from, I think, what Sara was pointing out. Some lessons were available from consumer-facing, consumer business-to-consumer kind of sites, like Wayfair. I bought some things from, and what I noticed was increasingly I would see technical documentation surfacing up next to my marketing materials, but they were still trying to convince me to buy it with a beautiful picture and some words describing the content. And I think they were trying to get me to the next point where I would consider adding that as a favorite, right? So that they feel like I'm getting closer to purchasing it. And as I did, I noticed that I started seeing user guides and manuals and things like that. And their micro content that was on the page was designed to show me things and point out that it wouldn't be very difficult to assemble this furniture, for example, which is a number one fear a lot of people have when they order something online. They're not sure how complicated it's going to be to put together. So it seemed like we could learn from them. Sara, do you have any other examples where you think some industry sector does a particularly good job of servicing up technical content alongside their Marcom and sales content?
I think a great place to look is looking at software companies in the knowledge management or CRM space, because they have a little bit more motivation to deliver a better, more seamless customer experience. So thinking of, knowledge base or knowledge management vendors. Now, I know that there's some out there that have things separated. So the clue is always, if you're seeing labels on the website that kind of match internal teams, right? If you're seeing here's where the training team publishes content, here's where the documentation, right? All those labels, that's kind of a red flag that they're not aiming for the seamless experience. Whereas if it's more like wherever you are, you're finding the information you need, and it's labeled in a way that's relevant to the user instead of internal organization, then that's what you want to look for.
That's a great way to end the show, and I think it's good advice, and it is kind of a nice tip there to be able to see where the content, what the intent is of the content, whether they're just organizing it by the way the company's organized or whether they're organizing it for the customer in a seamless manner. Certainly super important. Megan Gilhooly, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate you bringing your expertise to the show, along with your co-guest today, Sara Feldman. Both of you definitely demonstrate industry expertise, and sharing what you know during this time is particularly important to the 293 people watching the show live today. So both of you, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate our sponsor today, Zoomin Software. In fact, leading brands rely on Zoomin to help their customers and their employees find the product answers that they need when and where they need them. Zoomin's platform does this by unifying all your technical content and making it available in places like Salesforce, ServiceNow, or even inside your own product. By personalizing the content experience and providing actionable analytics that help your teams work smarter, Zoomin is an essential part of your digital transformation. To learn more about it, there's some great content on the Zoomin website at zoominsoftware.com, and don't forget to check the attachments and links section for information provided by Zoomin and the presenters on today's show. And speaking of today's show, this is one of 300 shows that we've put on in the past several years, attracting about 45,000 content professionals to the Content Wrangler channel on Bright Talk. If you would like to be on a show, or you know somebody that would make a great guest for either a talk show or to do a presentation like this, please send me a nomination or an idea. I'm happy to try to invite as many content professionals as we can to join the discussions here. You can do that by sending an email to scott@thecontentwrangler.com. And don't miss tomorrow's show, where we'll be talking with MK Palmore about preventing cybersecurity risks while working at home. MK is a former member of the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybersecurity Task Force and is currently working at Palo Alto Systems, helping direct security there. He's loaded with useful information and will have great tips for you about protecting yourself while working from home. And then Megan will rejoin me again on Tuesday, May the 12th, talk with Christina Halverson about her future plans and also about the role of product content in a customer experience today. So don't miss the show. Upcoming, a couple of other shows you might want to check out: developing a story-driven strategy to unify your team and differentiate your brand. I'll be speaking with Brendan Dell about some go-to-market strategies and how you can unify your voice while you're communicating with folks as well. And later in the month of June, we'll be talking about product information management systems with my friend Nate Holmes from Wyden, who will demystify product information management systems and talk to you about why you might need one and how it would benefit your organization. My name's Scott Abel. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for sticking with us during the technical difficulties. The internet is a wild and woolly place during these times, and during the pandemic, usage rates have been going up, skyrocketing. And we're happy that our presenters our providers of information services like Bright Talk are able to keep us online. And I'm appreciative that all of you have been struggling along with us as the internet is experiencing this rapid growth. Thanks for doing it. You've been watching today's webinar with Megan Gilhooly and Sara Feldman. It's called Survival Mode: How to Support and Documentation Teams Can Help Combat Churn. Please leave them a rating on the way out the door today using our 1 through 5 rating system. 1 is a low rating, 5 is high. There's even a little field where you can type in a comment to tell them what you thought of their presentation, and I know that they'd appreciate the constructive feedback. So please do that on the way out. And don't forget to check the attachment sections for the content that they provided you today, including a copy of today's slides. Thanks for joining us on the Content Wrangler program on Bright Talk. Until next time, keep doing great work. See you again soon.